Doesn't it feel that sometimes now games feel very different from games that we had like 10 years ago? Maybe it has to do with the fact that a lot of those studios that made those games just aren't around anymore. Today in GameRanx, here are 10 great game studios that don't exist anymore. Starting off with number 10, do you remember Pandemic Studios? The team behind the OG Star Wars Battlefront games. They also went on to make Mercenaries and Destroy All Humans, both of which were actually pretty good games. They also made Full Spectrum Warrior, which was a really cool military strategy game where you don't actually control the soldiers, but it's more like XCOM. It was actually a lot of fun. On October 11th, 2007, it was announced that Pandemic, along with BioWare, were being acquired by EA, and on November 17th, 2009, Pandemic was officially closed down, resulting in 228 people losing their jobs. 35 Pandemic employees were sent to work at EA Los Angeles to work on other projects, one of those being Mercenaries Inc., which would later be canceled. Currently, a lot of these ex-Pandemic employees now work at other studios like Respawn, 343, and Infinity Ward. So it's cool to see them find work elsewhere. They definitely deserve it. They all put out some very fun, good quality games. Moving on to number 9, Westwood Studios was founded in 1985 by Brett Sperry and Lewis Castle as Westwood Associates. Westwood's early work consisted of contract gigs for companies like Strategic Simulations Incorporated, importing 8-bit games to 16-bit systems like the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST. From there, the company used the funds to expand its team to develop its own games in-house, with the company's first original title being an RPG developed for EA in 1988 called Mars Saga. From there, the company developed a video game adaptation of the classic tabletop strategy game BattleTech, with the release of the RTS BattleTech The Crescent Hawk's Revenge, which is credited for laying a lot of the foundations for many RTS titles going forward. In 1991, the company saw a great deal of success with its D&D RPG Eye of the Beholder, which it developed for Strategic Simulations Incorporated. In 1992, Westwood Studios was acquired by Virgin Interactive, under which it produced hit titles like 1994's The Lion King, Blade Runner in 1997, Dune 2000 in 1998, and a total of 12 games under the Command & Conquer banner from 1995 to 2002. Amid all this, EA acquired the studio as part of a $122.5 million deal, and in 2003, EA closed the studios during a consolidation, which led to significant layoffs and personnel reshuffling, with some of the former employees being shifted to EA Redwood Shores and EA Pacific, while others went on to form Petroglyph Games in 2003. And at number 8, Hudson Soft Limited was founded in May 1973 by brothers Yuji and Hiroshi Kudo. Early Hudson Soft strongly favored quantity over quality, and at one point were putting out up to 30 titles a month, which wasn't working out particularly well for them, so in 1983 they flipped the script and started to focus on quality, eventually becoming Nintendo's first third-party software vendor for the Famicom. The company's first game under that partnership, Lode Runner, sold 1.2 million units. Hudson continued to make games for the Famicom, as well as other platforms like the ZX Spectrum and MSX, and was eventually reorganized as Hudson Soft Company Limited in July 1985, the same year the company released another hit, Bomberman. The following year saw the company doubling down on their hit franchises like Bomberman and continuing to make games for Nintendo, eventually developing the first 3 Mario Party games for the N64. While Nintendo and Hudson Soft had a long-standing partnership, the company had also been involved with Konami going back all the way to 1985, but that relationship eventually led to a full-on acquisition starting in 2001 after Hudson Soft was heavily impacted by the collapse of its primary bank and entered the stock market in 2000. Shortly after, Konami bought a whopping 5.6 million shares in the company. Eventually, Konami became the primary shareholder and parent company. As happens with many companies like Hudson Soft, they quietly blipped out of existence when it was fully merged into Konami Digital Entertainment on March 1st, 2012, after an agreement by the two companies in a board meeting to consolidate into a single entity. Next up at number 7, we have Midway, who was founded in 1958 and started publishing and developing arcade games in 1973. They're actually the ones responsible for publishing Space Invaders. Midway was very active and very successful in producing arcade games up until 2001, when due to financial losses they shut down its arcade division. It was at this point that they started buying up indie studios to focus on releasing games for home consoles, putting out games like Spy Hunter, Mortal Kombat, Wheelman, The Suffering, and others. In 2006, things weren't looking too great for Midway, Midway, and they began to lose money fast. Then in 2008, they filed for bankruptcy. Warner Brothers eventually stepped in 2009 and gained most of the remaining company assets, including the rights to Mortal Kombat. From here until 2011, Midway was closing studios and selling stuff off left and right. It's kind of sad to see Midway disappear. They were a big name in the arcade game scene, and they just couldn't keep up with the times. Other older publishers like Capcom and Sega managed to stay relevant post-arcades. Capcom is still super successful, and Sega still finds great success with games like Yakuza. Times changed, and Midway just wasn't able to keep up, unfortunately. Moving on to number 6, Sierra Entertainment was founded in 1977 in Simi Valley, California by Ken and Roberta Williams, originally as online systems with the intention of evolving adventure games from the text-only experiences that were the norm at the time. The company rebranded to Sierra Online in 1982, and in 1983, the company was hired by IBM to create a game for its new PC Junior. The duo set out to make a 3D perspective fantasy adventure, and in 1984, King's Quest released to near universal acclaim, kicking off the franchise. The years following saw the release of several now iconic adventure games such as Police Quest, Leisure Suit Larry, and Quest for Glory. By the mid-90s, the company had grown drastically, now having 5 largely autonomous developed divisions working on different projects, and by 1995, the company would be the market leader in PC gaming. The same year, Sierra released its biggest project yet, Phantasmagoria, which sold nearly 1 million copies despite mixed reviews. In 1996, Sierra was bought by e-commerce company CUC International. In November of that same year, Ken Williams met with Valve Softworks and negotiated Sierra's exclusive rights to publish Half-Life, which was debuted by Ken Williams at E3 1997. After a series of mergers, the company saw a major reorganization, resulting in the shutdown of various development studios and the relocation of key projects, as well as layoffs for around 250 employees. Sierra continued to publish games until 2008 when Vivendi merged with Activision in the great Activision Blizzard merger, moving ownership of Sierra and its properties to Activision. Shortly after, Sierra was closed and considered for possible future sale. On July 29, 2008, Activision killed several Sierra titles they saw weren't fit for its long-term strategy, and many of the former planned titles sold off to other publishers. This was the end of Sierra as we knew it. In 2014, however, Activision planned a revival for the Sierra name, releasing games like King's Quest and Geometry Wars 3 Dimensions under the revived banner. Moving on to number 5, we have Neversoft. Founded in 1994 by former employees of Malibu Interactive in Westlake Village, California. The studio had issues with funding even back then, with the studio about to run out of money in January 1998 after work on the PlayStation port of the PC game MDK. Before the studio went under, however, Activision came into the picture, wanting the studio to redevelop a Bruce Willis voice project called Apocalypse. With work on Apocalypse going well, Activision contracted Neversoft to develop a skateboarding game, and by the end of 1998, the 16-person studio was in full swing with development of the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Between 1999 and 2007, the studio developed 9 games in the series, and in that time, the studio grew from 16 to over 150 people. They worked on other things in that time, like the 2005 Western Gun, which was developed alongside Beanox and Rebellion Developments. But for the most part, it was all Tony Hawk all the time until 2006, when Activision acquired the rights to the Guitar Hero franchise and chose Neversoft to be the developer for the series. The studio put out 7 titles under the Guitar Hero banner, 8 if you count 2009's Band Hero, with their inaugural title 2007's Guitar Hero 3 Legends of Rock breaking several records and garnering a fair bit of good press and acclaim. In 2010, the franchise was handed over to Vicarious Visions, and in February 2010, the studio was hit with a 50-employee layoff. The studio was eventually being merged with Call of Duty developer Infinity Ward in May 2014. Shortly after, on July 10, 2014, exactly 20 years to the day of the studio's founding, Neversoft was officially made defunct, with the remaining employees burning a sculpture of the studio's iconic skewered eyeball in effigy. Coming in at number 4, we have Acclaim Entertainment. In March 1987, former Activision employee Greg Fishback, sales guy Jim Skorpowski, and partner Robert Holmes formed Acclaim Entertainment in Glen Cove, New York, in an effort to get back into the games business after branching out into other endeavors. In the years to follow, the company produced a bunch of products based on licenses from popular TV shows, movies, and comic books, professional wrestling games under the WWF license, as well as many of the ports of Midway arcade games like Mortal Kombat. The company also published games for several other companies who at the time didn't have American publishing arms, such as Tato's Bust a Move and Techno Japan's Double Dragon 2. The 1990s were especially good for Acclaim, with the company becoming one of the biggest and most successful publishers of console games, seeing a $585 million profit in 1995. Come 2004, however, things got a bit dicey for the publisher. Financial woes due to poor sales resulted in the closure of 2 of the Acclaim studios. The company also filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection and actually left a bunch of employees unpaid, which, I mean, come on, dick move, Acclaim. On August 20th, 2004, the company's agreement with Acclaim's primary lender expired, and a week later, the company closed all of its facilities. Next up at number 3, we have LucasArts. You all know LucasArts. They made most of the Star Wars games that we've all grown to love. Games like Super Star Wars, Dark Forces, Jedi Outcast, and Masters of Terras Kasi, the secret best Star Wars game. They also put out Indiana Jones titles and some others, but Star Wars was the bulk of what they put out. LucasArts were also the ones working on that dope-looking Star Wars 1313 game that was pretty much like an Uncharted Star Wars game where you were supposed to be going to be playing as a young Boba Fett. On October 30th, 2012, LucasArts was acquired by Disney, and it was business as usual until April 3rd, 2013, when it was announced that LucasArts would no longer make games, but instead would keep a small team to work as a licensor, and that all games would be either licensed out to third-party developers or handed off to Disney Interactive Studios, which actually led to EA making Star Wars games, which they've kind of shown us wasn't the best move. Anyway, just like that, no more LucasArts Star Wars games. Star Wars 1313 was unfortunately canceled, and so were 3 other unannounced games that they were working on. Next, number 2, this one is pretty recent and the wound is still fresh. Telltale Games closed their doors and filed for bankruptcy in November 2018. I'm sure you've all heard of Telltale Games, whether it be from all the news coverage of them closing or from one of their games. Walking Dead, Wolf Among Us, Batman, there's a ton. On September 21st, 2018, Telltale CEO Pete Hawley announced that the studio was being hit with a majority studio closure. 90% of their employees were let go that day, with the skeleton crew kept on to finish up some stuff. This happened pretty soon after the release of the first episode of the last season of The Walking Dead. According to reports, employees were pretty much blindsided by this, and that day were giving only 30 minutes to gather their belongings and vacate the premises. Their ex-employees were not treated well at all during all of this, and many of them took to social media to out Telltale about the suddenness of the closure, about health benefits being lost. Very, very messy stuff. Skybound Entertainment eventually acquired the rights to The Walking Dead and will finish the season with employees from the now defunct Telltale Games. So these people get some more work and they get to finish to tell their stories. Not all was lost, but still this is a super shitty situation. Finally, at number 1, Visceral Games, originally known as EA Redwood Shores, was an EA-owned studio. You probably know them as a team behind Dead Space. That game was so successful it actually led to Redwood Shores rebranding themselves as Visceral Games. As Visceral, they went on to make and release both Dead Space 2 and 3 and Dante's Inferno. In 2013, EA hired Amy Hennig to write the story for Yuma, which was set to be a pirate game, but after the announcement of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, the game was canceled in favor of a Star Wars game. This game was still going to have a piratey vibe just within the Star Wars universe, and after the release of Battlefield Hardline in 2015, which would actually be the last game that Visceral released, the team was split into 2. Half working on Hardline DLC and the other entering pre-production for this new Star Wars game. Going by Project Ragtag, this game had you playing as criminals, where you would control multiple characters, take on various jobs, all leading up to a big heist. In April 2017, Visceral showed their demo to EA and got the green light to continue production, but months later in October of that year, EA, just days after seeing a second demo, announced that they were closing down Visceral Games. The game was reassigned to EA Worldwide Studios, and rumor has it that the game that they were making out of it is very different. It was originally set to be a story-heavy linear experience, but was then turned into an open-world experience instead. This was a huge bummer. Amy Hennig had originally worked on the Uncharted series, so people were pretty excited to see what she could do with a Star Wars title. It's sad to see what happened to her game. Hopefully, whatever comes out of the ashes is able to avoid controversy like we had with Battlefront 2. And those are 10 great game studios that don't exist anymore, but we want to hear from you, so meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. As I'm sure you already know, hitting that like button really helps us out, and if you're new here, subscribing is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. As always, thank you for stopping by to hang out with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.